Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave.
Thank you for coming, and thank you to the community for providing me this facility to speak. I plan to speak obviously now up until 8:30 this evening, again tomorrow morning at 10:30, and again on Sunday morning at 10:30. The subject is a traditionalist approach to Krishna consciousness. There is a cultural divide within ISKCON. For instance, some devotees insist that women be addressed as Prabhu, and some insist that they should be addressed as Mataji. Now this may seem like a small thing, and we have more important things to discuss than what terms of address there should be. But it is a grain of rice that indicates the whole part. It may seem like a small thing, but underlying this particular example is a whole different attitude to life, and a whole different attitude to the application of the teachings of Srila Prabhupada. So I'm not going to discuss whether or not we should call women Prabhu or Mataji. Specifically, you can suspect or guess from my that I'm presenting a traditionalist approach. You can deduce from that which I would recommend. So the position I plan to outline is what could be called orthodox or conservative, but I prefer to use the term traditionalist. It's a traditionalist position, not the traditionalist, because there isn't exactly one position. No two people have exactly the same outlook on practically anything. And that's that's personalism. Srila Prabhupada, in one letter, he addressed a devotee's concern over differences and discord between devotees, but Prabhupada said, well, that's personalism, that there are differences. And to think that everyone should be exactly the same is impersonalism. So, nevertheless, Srila Prabhupada was definitely a teacher, and Shastra gives us general guidelines for behavior and understanding. So I'm presenting a traditionalist position, or the position that, as I understand, should be or would be better as the general approach of devotees to Krishna consciousness and of our movement to Krishna consciousness. I can't say I exactly represent the views or outlook of anyone else, although there are certainly devotees who can be broadly categorized as traditionalist or conservative or orthodox, as opposed to liberal or modernist or whatever. So another adjective that is sometimes used is fundamentalist. Another one is dinosaur. There are probably others also.
Old school.
Old school, yeah, old school. and although, these are pejorative terms, some devotees, it's difficult to define sometimes, because some devotees might be what could be called conservative on some issues and liberal on others. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur himself, who was really the first large-scale preacher of Krishna consciousness in the modern world, he was traditional, or orthodox in some ways. He was very strict in some ways. He didn't allow, or he said that Vaishnavas, they should, for instance, not be flesh eaters, which in Bengal, even up to the present day, now it's changing now due to the preaching, or mostly due to the preaching of ISKCON, but it was generally considered that, well, you just chant Hare Krishna, that's it. That's all you have to do. So following rules doesn't matter. All this eating, what you should eat, doesn't matter. You can eat anything you like. So he was very orthodox in some ways, but he was very liberal in others. For instance, in his initiating and awarding the sacred thread to people of all different castes and even subcastes. So, just to give an outline of some of the things that I advocate, practicing Krishna consciousness strictly, segregation of the sexes, worse than that, from some people's point of view, that male social superiority, Indian culture and tradition, no rock music, no kami food. The devotees should eat food that is offered to Krishna. These are just some of the things. That Srila Prabhupada didn't make mistakes, like this. So you get a general idea of what I'm talking about. So, what we may call the liberal outlook that I overall oppose tends to oppose the positions that I have just stated. This liberal position has had plenty of coverage within ISKCON, and seems to have practically taken over ISKCON in many areas, in many ways, although much of the world is, notwithstanding the Western cultural octopus that is seizing the whole world, still many areas of the world are very traditional in their outlook, and they don't like, and people don't like these kind of attitudes, and our devotees also don't like them. So it's what is seen from the Western world as being best is not necessarily so in other places. And so here in Alachua, there are many senior, learned, and qualified devotees residing. Nevertheless, I plan on doing the talking here, if you don't mind. I have the audacity to give this seminar here. I plan to leave time at the end for discussion and comments, and I'm sure there will be plenty of them if anyone cares to hang around for the duration of this seminar. If that's not done, then otherwise out of sequence points will be raised that I tend to progressively deal with. Some of the points I make may upset some devotees, but please observe the traditional value of not interrupting. You may make notes and anything you want to say, please keep it till the time at the end. And if you really don't like it very much, then it's only one seminar I'm giving. You can give another one afterwards to counteract all the bad propaganda I'm making here. Or you can write something on the internet or whatever. This seminar is addressed to mainstream ISKCON. So someone may think, the solution to all of ISKCON's problems is Ritvikism or Neo-Gaudiya-Mathism, but I'm not going to even discuss that here. It's just too much of a diversion. So, by the way, Ritvikism is completely unorthodox and non-traditional. So, it's outside the purview of this discussion altogether. This seminar is not aimed at any specific individuals or any groups of devotees. There will always be varying approaches in Krishna consciousness. I don't expect to change the world. You could say I'm not really on a campaign. I'm not saying that, I'm going to come in your house and throw out all your, any book which has any suggestion of anything that I don't like, for instance. I'm not going to come and throw out your TVs, although I do recommend it. But to date I haven't physically done that myself. You may do so if you have TVs. So, alright, having said that, I was saying traditionalists, I prefer that term to conservative, which, in using terms we have to be very careful. Just like when we say conservative, liberal, it's not only within ISKCON, it's within the broader world. Particularly in America, there's a serious cultural divide, which I don't think is there in other countries so much as in America, between it's divided on political lines, isn't it? Who you vote for, Republican, Democrat, and conservative versus liberal. I heard that even here in the Alachua community, there are devotees who are staunchly Republican, and I heard that one guru somewhere in America tells his disciples to go and vote Democrat. Srila Prabhupada in one purport wrote that people should be Krishna conscious and should not vote for anyone who is not Krishna conscious. So I don't know if the present President of America is considered to be Krishna conscious, or his opponent, Muk something or other. He wasn't very Krishna conscious either. There was an interesting BTG article some years ago by Suresh Prabhu. Probably all of you know. He went to this, in the article, according to the article, he was living in Gitanagar at that time and tending the cows. So he wrote that he went to discuss with the cows who to vote for. And they said, well, they're all going to kill us, whoever it is. Don't vote for any of them. He has a unique style, Suresh Prabhu. And I sent that article actually to him before this or before the previous election or presidential election or before that. He said, I'm glad you said that to me because I was just thinking I should be a good citizen and go and vote. So that reminded him. Anyway, we are in America, and my personal observation is that it seems to be particularly difficult for Americans to understand the importance of culture and tradition, because America really never had that much of it. It's been a melting, it's supposed to be a melting pot of different cultures, but one reason is that there isn't a tradition going back hundreds and hundreds of years. So, and also, I'll discuss that in a little. Whatever culture America may have had has been severely undermined, particularly in recent generations, by brash commercialism, pop culture, and hedonism. Now, there's a general understanding which is inculcated through the educational system, maybe it's changing a bit now, in the West, that modern man, particularly Western man, and maybe particularly white man, is at the zenith of cultural development. Everything in the past was backward, and that now we got it right. In the world previously, whatever was wrong, or whatever was old, is wrong. And now we are more advanced. Now we have made scientific studies. Now we have made social studies. We have democracy. We have human rights. And really, this is the zenith of human culture. And the modern society is correcting the multiple anomalies and aberrations of the past, such as authoritarianism, sexual taboos. It was considered that Freud's idea that sexual taboos are the cause of psychological disorders, suppression of women, suppression of gays. This is cause of all the problems in the past. So now we're enlightened. Modern society is much influenced by great thinkers like Charles Darwin, Sigmund Freud, Jacques Rousseau, liberté, égalité, fraternité, etc. The American Revolution was much influenced by the French Revolution, which was founded on the principles of liberté, égalité, fraternité, and shortly, very quickly, evolved into mob rule. The guillotine became the dispenser of justice. So this general idea is there, and it's even cited to justify America, or not just America, but the NATO's intervention in Afghanistan and Iraq. It's cited that you see they don't have introducing democracy. They want to give them democracy and human rights, which they don't have. So it's considered that their way of life is intrinsically wrong because they haven't come to the platform that we have. So we have to give it to them, whether they like it or not. But modern society, especially this motor car society, or motor car civilization, as Srila Prabhupada referred to, it's just a blip in time. Especially if we consider, as the Vedic knowledge teaches us, there's cyclical time. The modern way of thinking is that time is linear. That some years ago there were monkeys jumping around, and then some of them stood up. It's actually stated in Encyclopedia Britannica which is supposed to be highly authoritative, that there were some monkeys jumping around in the forest, and then some of them, they were tall enough to stand up and catch the fruits on the lower branches of the trees, and then they got a genetic advantage, those ones, and so the two-legged, the ones that stood up, they became humans. You see, that's how monkeys became humans. And then they have gradually evolved to modern man. But the cyclical understanding of time is that there's the various ages, Satya, Treta, Dwapara, Kali, and that this kind of society that we have at present is the very fact that it doesn't follow the Vedic culture is a sign of its degradation, not the sign of its exaltation. And even modern sociologists and anthropologists can understand that it won't last long. It can't last. This modern society is based on oil, and as people are more and more becoming aware, the oil civilization can only last as long as the oil lasts, and it appears that it's not going to last that much longer. So this society as we have it only arose recently, and it won't last long. And traditional society is agrarian-based, not city-based. And modern society is, the very fact that it's commercially driven, it's city-based, rather than based on agriculture. Of course, there's cities in Vedic culture, but not, what's the word, megalopolises?
Metropolis.
Just like from Osaka to Tokyo, if anyone went on the bullet train, you'll see a few fields in between. Otherwise, it's just like 300 kilometers, or 200 miles, just city. Factories, buildings, roads, Mexico City, 20 million people, and getting bigger. So there's cities in Vedic culture, but not this kind of city where people are squashed in, polluted. The majority of people live on the land, produced food, and a whole different outlook on life comes just from living in the country. A whole different approach to life, and it's not a commercially driven society. So modern society, although it's supposed to be the apex of human development, it's fraught with problems. This Freud, he had the idea that we have so many problems because of sexual taboos, but the sexual revolution has produced, it's one of the factors in producing a society that is seriously sick, in which most people at some point in time consult a psychiatrist, or they need some kind of drugs for stimulation or sedation. It's a society in which intoxication is rampant, marital instability, physical and mental diseases, addictions, all kinds of crime. There's over 2 million people in America in prison. That's more than the population of maybe 50 or 100 countries in the world. There are many countries with less populations. And widespread discontent, struggle. Everyone's struggling. Pretty much everyone is struggling, right? I mean, most people we meet, for them it's a struggle to pay the bills. And even people who have money are they feel insecure. So it's a very disturbed society. So therefore, many people are looking toward traditional societies, and many people have, at least in our generation, joined the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, the Hare Krishna movements, because of discontent with modern society. And we were prepared to accept what Srila Prabhupada said, even though many of the things that Srila Prabhupada said, if not most of them, go against pretty much everything that's accepted as normal and reasonable and sane in modern society. I know when the 5th canto of Bhagavatam came out with the descriptions of the universe, including giant birds that fly from one planet to another and lay eggs in outer space, and I heard at the time that some devotees were disturbed by this. How could this be possible? There's a famous anecdote of Srila Prabhupada's servant Purushottam being totally so disturbed with Srila Prabhupada's saying that the moonshot, which was being shown live on TV, can't you see it? Srila Prabhupada was just laughing and saying it's bogus. So some devotees at that time were disturbed, but most, as I remember when the 5th canto came out, some devotees were surprised, but it's generally accepted that, well, if Prabhupada says and the Vedic scriptures say, then must be right. That faith was there. However, that seems to have changed. And increasingly devotees, they seem to think that, well, what the scientists think, what comes up in the universities, that should be right. And if Prabhupada and Shastra says something and it doesn't tally with what modern so-called scientists say, that we have to reassess what Prabhupada says. But then, as Prabhupada often pointed out, why should we believe what the scientists say? They always change their opinion, just like we were discussing this Stephen Hawking. He said one thing, then he says something else. He writes one book, then he writes another book saying, actually that book was wrong. And now he's come out with something else saying, well, I changed my position again. And this is supposed to be science. Whereas the Vedic culture, the Vedic knowledge, well, Veda means knowledge. And the Vedic knowledge, it's the very gist of it, or the way it's to be accepted, is to be accepted as correct. That is the method of acceptance. There we go. No, this went off.
Probably just going to have to be recorded.
Was the sound, is there some problem with the sound? No. Someone always has to fiddle around with the mic. Could someone drop a pair of cartels on the floor, get that over and done with? That's also a necessity. Sorry for the sarcasm.
Take a phone.
Oh yes, turn your cell phones off, please. Now I lost it. Okay, leave it. Just leave it. I'll get the recording for a second. I have to wait some time. Yeah, so why should we... Yeah, it's gone again. Problem solving had an opposite effect. Just sit down. Yeah, just go down. So, now why should we think that what modern scientists or sociologists or psychologists, why should we be so concerned with what they say? In Vedic knowledge there is science also. Just like the whole system of astrology is based on astronomy. And with the Vedic astronomical system, one can calculate the times of the rising and the setting of the sun and the moon at any place on the planet, using Vedic knowledge, which was there long before the modern astronomical knowledge. So that it shows that they did have scientific knowledge. It wasn't that they were, as the early Indologists in the 19th century, they wanted to they studied the Vedas with the idea of showing that Indian culture is all backward. They were afraid of it. The British went to so many countries in the world, but in no country other than India did they make a systematic study of the culture with the aim of undermining it, which actually that's a compliment to Indian culture, because they felt that they needed to do that. Otherwise they wouldn't be able to rule the Indian people, who through centuries of Muslim domination managed, and not just domination, but in many cases torture and severe exploitation, genocide, but they retained their culture. So the British, they wanted to show that they wanted to undermine the Vedic culture, and that attitude has remained within academia ever since. That if it's coming from India, it must be wrong. India is generally portrayed as all the bad things which are there. Always we hear of caste, disease, poverty, starvation, but that the culture, the original culture, is the culture which presents actual knowledge of the purpose of life and how to attain it. This is what Srila Prabhupada came to give. Therefore he himself said, I'm the greatest cultural ambassador of India. Of course his knowledge transcends India, but that Srila Prabhupada, he wasn't simply a theoretical philosopher or a sectarian religionist, but he gave a whole package and a whole way of life that fulfills all the needs of not only humans but of every living being. It's the best ecological system also. But it can't be taken piecemeal. That you can't just say, well, I accept, okay, Krishna, we accept him as supreme, but we don't like this part, so we'll throw that out. The half-chicken approach. That, well, Prabhupada said this, okay, I like that, but this bit, well, I think it was wrong, so we know better. This is not the way to approach a guru, which is very difficult maybe for people in the modern age to accept a guru, but if at all we are to be Krishna conscious, then we have to accept Vedic knowledge as axiomatic. Even if it appears in our judgment to be wrong, we should accept it as correct and not think that the Vedas are wrong. Just like in the Vedas it's stated, Srila Prabhupada gives the example, that the stool of an animal is impure, but that of a cow is pure. Not that of a Brahmana. Brahmana's stool is impure, but cow's stool is pure. The bone of an animal or a human is impure, but the conch, which is the bone of an animal, is pure. So these are to be accepted simply axiomatically. I perceive this as a major problem within our major problem that undermines the whole basis of Krishna conscious understanding. The idea that Krishna conscious understanding is to be modified by that of modern academia or the modern way of thinking. everyone's attitudes are shaped by the way we were raised, the society we grew up in, but we should understand that the society that we grew up in is a society based on ignorance of the goal of life. It's based on gross sense gratification, which goes against the purpose of life. It's an artificial society, highly exploitive society, and it's a society that's failed. Modern society is a failure. Srila Prabhupada, he made a festival, a lecture series in Bombay with the title, very bold title, Modern Civilization is a Failure, Krishna Consciousness is the Solution. Now we may think that, well, Krishna consciousness is a failure, so modern society is the solution. Some devotees seem to think like that. They say, well, the Gurukuls didn't work, there's so many problems, therefore Prabhupada's teachings are a failure. So we have to modify them with modern ideas. But I would say that it's not that Prabhupada's teachings are a failure, but that our execution of them has been flawed. But that if we stick to what Prabhupada gave us, and if we actually follow what he gave us, then everything will be not only all right, but will be the actual solution to all the problems. That we have the solution. So our modern society, to import the ideas of that, is not very intelligent when we consider that it's shaped by a mass media. Modern society and people's attitudes within it are shaped by a mass media and an educational system that really doesn't have people's best interest at heart. It's when there are advertisements, buy this, buy that, the people are advertising this, they really don't have our best interest, and they're not thinking, well, how can we benefit you by selling you some hamburgers? They're not thinking of, or whatever it is. They're thinking of their profit. So our attitudes are shaped by a highly commercialized society in which the main motive is of some people to make some money. They don't have our best interests at heart. But nevertheless, as has been documented, that the media is owned, or the mass media is highly, and even the educational system is highly influenced by people who want us to fit into their society and be part of the commercial society, or commercialized society, in which it's considered respectable and proper just to be a member of society as it is. And our way of thinking is shaped by that. What is proper behavior, what should be done, what should not be done. According to the standard of Bhagavad Gita, pravritincha nivritincha janana vidurasuraha. Those who do not know what is to be done and what is not to be done according to the direction of Shastra, they are to be considered demons. An unpopular word in our modern ISKCON, one that Srila Prabhupada used all the time. Ya Shastra vidimutrija vartate kamakarataha nasa siddhinavaknati nasukam naparam natin. One who does not follow the direction of Shastra, but acts according to their whim, they cannot attain happiness, perfection, or the ultimate goal of life. We have some competition here from some subliminal programming going on. How is that? Any idea? Hare Krishna. All right. Expert. So people think that they think for themselves. We're taught to think for ourselves. But it's funny how people who are supposed to think for themselves all seem to think in a pretty similar kind of way. within certain cultural parameters. No one, without being trained, for instance, without being trained in Krishna consciousness, no one thinks in a Krishna conscious manner. Everyone's influenced by others. No one thinks for themselves. This idea that I form my own opinions, it's not possible, because we are all influenced by what we hear, what we're educated in. The modern society promotes that, well, we all have freedom, especially America, is based on the idea of freedom, free speech, democracy. But in Vedic culture, free speech, it's not that everyone has the right to speak out and say whatever they like. In the name of free expression, pornography goes on. It's allowed on the basis of free speech. So people should be free to express themselves. But it's clearly harmful for society. It adds nothing of any value to society. So this is just an example of how misdirected, and due to not understanding the proper goal of life, how misdirected modern civilization is. Speech, who should speak? In Vedic culture, those should speak who are learned in understanding the proper goal of life, and whose character is ideal. Such person should speak and should be heard. Not that everyone has equal rights. It should not be equal rights. Those who can actually speak and act in a manner that is beneficial to everyone without any exploitive tendency, that means brahmanas, their words should be taken very seriously. They know what to speak because they've studied within the Vedic tradition, they've studied Shastra, under the guidance of an ideal teacher. So such persons, their words should be taken very seriously. Not that anyone and everyone, just by virtue of being born in a human body, has equal rights with everyone else. So this is practically considered a sacred principle in the modern Western world, that everyone has equal rights. But that's not there in Vedic culture. Speech, free speech, what is called free speech, that gives the right to people to promote or propagate, propaganda that's actually very misleading. Just like nationalism, it's not there in Vedic culture. The idea our country is a world power. The whole idea of nationalism, it's actually used to exploit the citizens. That in the name of keep our country strong, but who's benefiting? It's just a few people who benefit from that. Whereas most people, they have to live an exploited life. So many people in the modern world, they're to some extent looking toward traditional values. There is interest in traditional society. Srila Prabhupada advocated as the next stage of his movement. He said 50% of my work is not done, which is a lot, considering what did Prabhupada do. What he did was already more than anyone could have imagined. In terms of practically spreading Krishna consciousness, more than all the previous acharyas together. What Srila Prabhupada did was inimitable. But he said 50% of my work is not done by not establishing varnashram, or the practical way of life by which people can live in a manner that sustains their body, sustains the Krishna conscious culture, and sustains our progressive efforts in Krishna consciousness. So we see that many people are interested in living simply, without Krishna consciousness. They're simply living simply. Well, they may live simply, but they don't get the actual point of life. Whereas devotees, if they have the actual goal of life, the knowledge that Srila Prabhupada gave us, but we become influenced by the modern way of life, then we're not able, or we continue to live according to the values of the modern world, and it's very difficult to establish the culture that Srila Prabhupada wanted to establish. That Krishna consciousness should be spread very widely. Many, Srila Prabhupada said millions of people should join our family. That potential is there. In traditional societies that Srila Prabhupada started, I'm not just talking about Vedic culture now, but in traditional societies all over the world, automatically, without having to discuss it or make a sociological analysis of it, family values were just automatically there. No one even thought of family values because it was just so intrinsic in the culture that we live as a family, we care for the elders, we look after the children, we don't abuse the children. It's just so intrinsic that even the thought of family values wasn't there. It's just like, most people don't even think about the air we breathe. It's just there. But nowadays we speak of family values to try to inculcate them. But in traditional societies, it's just absolutely part of life. The culture of respect, that elderly persons were respected, knowledgeable persons were respected, persons in a higher stature, those who were just like the Kshatriyas had to be respected by the Vaishyas and Shudras. In traditional societies, the religious grounding was also automatic. Everyone was religious. There's no question of not being religious, whatever the religion may be. There was not democracy or free speech. Tradition was revered. It was considered that the way we live our life is according to the way our forefathers have lived their lives. And that is something to be upheld. Just like, for instance, times have changed maybe now, but some Christian missionaries in Bangladesh, they noted that it's so difficult to change people's way of life and people's way of thinking in Bangladesh. Just like, for instance, they might want to teach the people some better farming techniques, what they thought are better farming techniques. So like the Green Revolution, it's just like the mode of passion. The Green Revolution, they brought in oil-produced fertilizers and pesticides and new varieties of grains, and then they produced so much grain. So in India, that solved India's grain problem. So that was considered a great step forward. But now they're reaping the benefit, or the result of that is that all the soil is spoiled. And it's the same all over the world. But it's like the mode of passion. It seems good in the beginning, but the end result is that it's a disaster. So in the same way, this Green Revolution, and now the effect of that is there. And in India, some of the government agencies are trying to get people to go back to the old system of farming, which is sustainable, even though it doesn't give massive output. But what's happening now is the soil is so spoiled, you have to throw in more and more fertilizers and pesticides, and even then you can't grow very much. And the new strains of grains, they're very weak, and unless they have all this fertilizer and pesticide, then they don't grow at all. And the pests also, they don't die from the pesticide, so you have to put more and more and invent more and more. And I want to go back to some people are advocating going back to the old system, but it's difficult because so many of the varieties of grains are lost just in two generations. And so many indigenous breeds of cows are there, lost, gone. So, in Bangladesh, there's some Christian missionaries. I know it's so difficult to change the people. They're trying to teach them how to farm with new methods, and the people will listen to them. Okay, all right. Okay, what about now? And then they maybe do it for a little time, and then someone will say, "Well, our forefathers, they never did that," and that's it, finished. The very fact that our forefathers did things in a certain way was considered practically sacred. Just to change is considered inherently wrong. It's like disrespecting the traditional knowledge, because knowledge in traditional society is considered sacred. It's knowledge, especially in the Vedic culture. Knowledge is understood to come from transcendental sources. The Veda is considered transcendental. The Vedic culture is based on the Avarohana Pantha, that knowledge is descending. But whereas modern society is based on the idea we study, we find out new things, everything's getting better, whatever they knew in the past was all rubbish. Creativity, we're making more research. Okay, we made some pesticides and now the pests have become resistant to that, so we'll make some new pesticide. Don't worry, we're going to solve all the problems. Science is going to give the solution to all the problems. And this idea, again, creativity, just like if you come up with some new style of music, some new style of art, that's considered something wonderful. Whereas in Vedic culture, the system of art has been the same. It just doesn't change. And even researchers, archaeologists have been surprised to find in India the same kind of art, just like sculptures, that's still being made by traditional sculptors in India today, or rather deities that cast using the same method. So its creativity is not considered a quality. In Vedic culture, creativity is considered almost sacrilegious. Some time ago, one of the great PhDs of ISKCON came to understand that much of Srila Prabhupada's purports are simply translations of the previous acharyas' writings. And she considered that a great fault. And this is plagiarism. You're not supposed to just copy someone's work and then put your name on it. That's considered unethical in modern society. But in Vedic culture, that's what you do. Someone writes a commentary. We'll find previous commentary, just like Sridhar Swami wrote what is accepted as the original commentary on the Srimad Bhagavatam, and the commentators after him, they often quote him verbatim without even saying his name, and they may add something of their own also. But that's not considered a fault in Vedic culture. It's a completely different approach. The idea is that you're supposed to quote, it's understood that you're following the previous acharyas, you're not changing it. So if you make your own commentary, you may at times just put in Sridhar Swami's commentary, and maybe add a little something of yourself. Or commentators after Baladev Vidyabhushan, Vishwanath Thakur, they may just quote him without saying. Srila Prabhupada's Chaitanya Charitamrita purports especially are largely based on those of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Sometimes he quotes that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur says, many times he doesn't. So in Western culture that would be considered plagiarism, but in Vedic culture that's what you do. That's what it means to be a disciple, to quote your guru, and it's understood that every commentator does that. So you see, it's a very different approach to life. It's an approach of accepting and building on the knowledge in the past with the understanding that the knowledge is already there. Everything we need to know is already there. And we simply have to take that and utilize it in our lives. Whereas in modern society, the idea is that man is the architect of his own destiny in all respects, and we are discovering how to live life better. And whatever is there in the past, because it's coming from the past, that just by ipso facto, but because it's from the past, it must be incomplete and wrong and unreliable and unacceptable, and whatever's the latest, they talk about the latest knowledge. What a nonsense statement, the latest knowledge. That means that it's not knowledge. If it's the latest, then it's subject to change. It's not knowledge. Now this may all seem like ABC, or as they say, 101 to devotees. But the very fact that we're having this seminar is because these values of accepting Vedic knowledge have largely been eroded or sidestepped within our society, which it is a major problem, because the whole manner in which we accept Krishna consciousness is that of submission to Guru, Sadhana and Shastra. And if we don't have that, then we don't have Krishna consciousness. So, I use that term fundamentalism at the beginning. This kind of approach is often labeled fundamentalism, or the traditional approach within ISKCON and within what we might call other religious traditions. That's often called fundamentalist, and we see this divide in churches in the West between those who insist, for instance, that the Bible does not sanction homosexuality, and those on the other side of the spectrum who are happy that their spiritual or religious leaders are ordained openly practicing gays. So there's a divide, and that divide is also there within our society. Those on the liberal side, they often label those on the what we could call the orthodox side. Although again, it's not. There may be shades of grey also. It's not that everyone's exactly in the same box. But this is often labeled as fundamentalism because it's absolutist. People are afraid of absolutist fundamentalism, Islamic fundamentalism. That term, fundamentalist, makes us afraid. Fundamentalist means someone who can blow you up, because he thinks that by doing so, Allah will be pleased with him. I recently read an article about a 16-year-old boy in Pakistan who had been recruited by Al-Qaeda, and he trained to be a suicide bomber, and he was very happy. He thought that, great, I'm going to go and blow up some of those Americans or whoever doesn't agree with us, and then I'll go to heaven and enjoy. Allah will provide me an unlimited stock of virgins for eternity. So that's what he thought. Sounds stupid, doesn't it? Well, some people believe that, and they're willing to blow others up for this, kill themselves and kill others in the process, specifically for the purpose of killing others, because they believe that they're misled by some fundamentalist religious belief. They're also Christian fundamentalists, some of whom there was Christian militias in America. I think that's not so popular. They blew up some buildings in the name of God, and the history of religion is often, the history of Christianity is often cited, the famous Inquisition and the Crusades. And I read a thick book on the history of Christianity, well-written book, and I thought it might have something about different philosophical discussions, but it was mostly just about how they're killing each other and everyone else. That's the history of Christianity. As Prabhupada said, the whole history of Christianity is one of killing. And I guess I could have said reading the book is interesting. But just killing. So people are afraid of absolutism. It's considered dangerous. And certainly misplaced absolutism is. But on the other hand, relativism, the idea that there's no fixed truth, there's no actual reality, everything, that's also a demoniac attitude. Satyam apratishtamte jagadahuraniswaram aparastra samhutam kimanyat kama hitukam. This is the attitude of the demons. They think there's no ultimate fixed reality. Reality is whatever you conceive it to be. There's no ultimate basis to the universe. Things are going on without any God. There's no need of any God. There's just things have come into being by chance. That's what Krishna says. It's not some modern scientist who dreamt up this theory. It's an ancient attitude of demoniac people to think that everything has come into being by chance. Paraspara sambhutam, an interaction of elements or forces. Everything has come into being simply by chance. So this relativism, that's also in personalism. Jata mat tata pat, think whatever you like, any opinion is as good as any other. Well, that's dangerous in another way. Of course, people who think that any opinion is as good as any other, they're not so likely as, for instance, Islamic fundamentalists to blow people up. But, so it's maybe socially less dangerous, but spiritually it's a disaster. Because you remain in the material world, and probably in the course of your evolution through various species of life, you might become an Islamic fundamentalist or something similar to that, maybe many lifetimes later. Because that's the way material life goes on. That one floats from one position to another within this relative material world. That no one has any fixed understanding. They're just going from one body to another, one understanding to another. They're born in one country and one culture and one birth, and in another country, another culture, another birth. So relativism, it's also dangerous. The actual position, I'm not going to go into very deeply philosophically just now, but that we have accepted in Krishna consciousness is an absolute position. That there is ultimate reality, and that absolute reality specifically is Krishna. That various people in various what we may call religious traditions may refer to God by various names, but we accept that as a fact that the ultimate understanding of this supreme truth is Krishna, and that we are subordinate to Him, and that we have to surrender to Him. Krishna gives an absolute directive in Bhagavad Gita, which Srila Prabhupada quotes. I quote this morning from Srimad Bhagavatam. We read, Sarvadhaman parityajya mam ekam sharanam praja. Give up everything else and simply surrender to me, Krishna says. This is a highly absolutist position, demanding of complete surrender. So it is an absolutist position. However, I wish to present here, and still in the introduction to this seminar, that we can present a traditional and absolutist outlook, which people are afraid of in the modern age. In California, I was told that when preaching to the public, some words which you have to be careful to use when speaking to young people in Southern California. Words not to use: God, Lord, surrender, preach. Don't use these words. They'll be immediately turned off. But I hope in this seminar to present in a systematic, sober manner that a traditionalist approach within Krishna consciousness is not the fanaticism or the fundamentalism which is associated with Christian and Islamic absolutism, and that such a presentation can be appreciated by thoughtful and sober devotees. Absolutist position, it demands faith and commitment. Krishna consciousness demands faith and commitment. Ado Shraddha. In the beginning there must be faith. It demands, we can't go anywhere in Krishna consciousness without faith and commitment. That is required. This absolute position, it's clear, which is maybe another reason that we were attracted to Krishna consciousness in the first place. So it's a reason why people are attracted to fundamentalist religions. People are those who promote liberal education are surprised and maybe distraught that so many people, even despite all our efforts at promoting liberal education, that people are attracted to fundamentalist religion. Well, one reason for that is that in fundamentalist religion, everything's very clear. Even if it's wrong, at least it's a clearly presented path that do this, don't do this. This is what people want, some guidance in life. The people are confused and they think, okay, it's all okay. In Islam, you can't eat pork. Okay, alright. You can eat beef as long as it's killed, as long as the cow is must be killed by the halal method, then it's okay. So you can do this, you can't do there are things, certain things you do and you don't do, and then everything will be alright. So that may seem simplistic, but it's clear. Absolutism is also exclusivist, that this is right and others are wrong. Actually, in Krishna consciousness, although we are absolutists, we are not exclusivists in the sense of the religious teachings that really turned me off when I was a kid. I was raised in the Catholic tradition that unless you're in the general Christianity, that if you're not a Christian, then you burn in hell forever. And it's particularly exacerbated being born in an Irish Catholic background, which if you're not a Catholic, you burn in hell forever. God, He only likes the Catholics. So I couldn't work out, when I thought about it, I couldn't really work out how the Catholics are that much better than the Protestants. And therefore I thought, what shall I do? Maybe if there's a Catholic church on one side of the road and a Protestant church on the other, I'll stand in the middle, and when God comes in the day of judgment, I'll see which side He's going to land on and run in that church. And in this way I'll be saved. Otherwise it's how can you tell? Everyone says ours is the right way, it's this way only. Actually, we don't say that in Krishna consciousness. So we have an absolute position that Krishna says, Sarvadhamam Parityajya, one ultimately has to come to this position. But at the same time, we recognize that there are other approaches to God, and that any religious system, if it has some idea of God, well, that's a step, although maybe not a very advanced step. So absolute means clear, exclusivist, it demands faith and commitment. Relativism, on the other hand, tries to include everyone. And in this we find humanism, in which the human race, the best interest of the human race, that is considered the blueprint or the worldview on which humans should live. That everyone should tolerate everyone else. No one path is intrinsically better than another. That we're all humans, so we should just live with each other and be tolerant. And such an idea, as I say, people have such ideas, they are less likely to blow others up for no good reason, if there is any good reason for blowing others up. But it also, it's unclear, it doesn't give any specific direction toward the ultimate goal of life. Humanism is also based on atheism, that there is no God who has given us any proper goal of life. And it also, within relativism, there's the idea that, well, there's nothing which is intrinsically right or wrong. It just depends on different people's opinions. And these can be modified in course of time. According to, as the human race develops, we get more mature understanding, and thus what is considered right and what is considered wrong changes in human society. There was a time when all the Christian churches were completely opposed to contraception. Then gradually they said, well, okay, under certain conditions. And now there are churches who vigorously promote it, that this is required to limit the expansion for the benefit of humankind. We have to promote family planning. That's an example. Or there was a time when all churches, they were strongly against homosexuality, but now we see that's changed. So by being influenced by humanistic and relativistic ideas, that nothing is wrong if it doesn't harm anyone else. These are ideas coming from, if we look at the history of ideas, from Jeremy Bentham and others, that what is good for human society is that which produces the greatest good for everyone. And so the idea that utilitarianism, the idea that, well, there's nothing really harmful in anything as long as you don't harm anyone else, you can do whatever you like. Of course, without knowing the laws of nature, the laws of karma, then what is harmful, people don't know. And therefore we accept the Shastric understanding that contraception, that's also sinful, because sexual contact is everything in human life is meant for progressive advancement toward the ultimate goal of life, in which sense gratification is the principle, or unrestricted sense gratification or actually any sense gratification is the major obstacle towards self-realization. And that on top of that, contraception denies the entry into the womb of the soul who is meant for that, and therefore it's equal to abortion. So relativism, it doesn't accept anything as intrinsically right or wrong, and what it comes down to is kim anyat kama aitukam, what is there but fulfillment of our desire. What a sense gratification becomes the benchmark or the measure by which everything is measured, Some statement I saw some years ago in a newspaper article by an American student who said that the modern American society is the best ever in history because it offers the pursuit, the unrestricted pursuit of happiness to everyone. And happiness, presumably in his dictionary, was defined as the opportunity for sense gratification. So it's a society based on ignorance. Relativism does not demand faith or commitment, but it stresses the exercise of intelligent discrimination, that we should look and see for ourselves and make studies and intelligently discriminate for ourselves what is right and wrong. And that, therefore what is considered right and what is wrong may change. Just like it was considered wrong at one time, it was generally considered wrong, homosexuality was considered wrong. Now, in the modern relativistic society, it's considered, yeah, it's okay. Well, what's wrong with it? Let's rethink what we thought. So, philosophically, Krishna consciousness cannot be properly accepted in any other than an absolute manner. There's no half. Actual Krishna consciousness cannot be half Krishna consciousness. We find again and again in Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna speaks of Ananya Bhakti, Ananya Cheta Satatam, Ananya Aschintayantam. Ananya means without any other, accepting me without any other. Kamaisthaista Hridagyana Pratadyantenya Devataha. Persons who are impelled by material desire, they worship other demigods. They go elsewhere. Krishna speaks of pure devotional service. So there may be mixed devotional service. But whatever the mixture is a contamination. Philosophically, Krishna consciousness is to be accepted as absolute. The Vaishnava position, the Vedantic position is that there is a specific reality. It's not dependent on reality is not dependent on what we think. This is actually an extremely egoistic concept. That, just like it's a common thing in the Western world that some TV team goes out on the street and walks up, sticks a mic in someone's face and says, well, what do you think about this, that, whatever the latest issue is? Well, I think blah, 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 blah. Yeah. Everyone's expected to have an opinion on everything. So often people ask us, well, what do you think about this? What do you believe in? Srila Prabhupada would always respond to that. It is not a question of belief. It is a matter of fact, of understanding what is the actual reality. When people ask me, do you believe? I say, it doesn't matter what I believe. Why do you think it matters? I'm just a tiny, insignificant being. We should try to understand what is the fact, which cannot be understood, even by asking people's belief. Even if 99% of the population believes that 1 + 1 = 3, it's not correct. And they say, well, it's a democratic country, I believe it. And you're entitled to that belief, but you're not going to get a job as an engineer or even a factory worker for that matter. You're more likely to be incarcerated in a mental asylum. So the Vedantic position is that reality is definable and knowable. It is not subject on our belief. We are subject to Krishna's belief. That's the actual fact. We are subject to him. We are subordinate. We are controlled. And that reality is definable, it is not relative, and it is knowable, and that we should know it. This is the purpose or the mission of human life, to know Jnanam Jnayam Jnanagam Yam. Krishna is knowable by knowledge. There is a method to understand it. It's not vague. People speak of, I'm spiritual. I like spiritual feelings. But it's not just some vague feelings. As Srila Prabhupada often presented, Krishna consciousness is a science. The subtitle, The Nectar of Devotion, the complete science of Bhakti Yoga. It's a science in as much as if we follow the rules and regulations, we will get the result. And if we don't get the result. It's not just a matter of, well, I feel in my heart so much love for Krishna. But it's not just it's not a matter of just feeling, but one has to follow the regulations given by Krishna. If one loves Krishna, then he should follow the regulations. Once the devotee asked Srila Prabhupada, how can I advance in Krishna consciousness? Follow the rules and regulations. That's the process given by the acharyas. So, reality is definable and knowable, should be known. There is a process to know reality, who is Krishna. Krishna, to a large extent, or to some extent, Krishna is definable. He gives knowledge of himself. He defines himself as Matah Parataram Nanya, Kinchid Asti, there is nothing beyond him. Arjuna sums up all that Krishna says about himself as Param Brahma, Param Dhamma, Pavitram, Paramam Bhava. So Krishna is to be known as the Supreme Truth. Still, we may say in Krishna consciousness is also relativist. At the highest stages, the devotees, they don't think of Krishna as the Supreme Truth. They treat him as subordinate. But from our position within this material world, and certainly within preaching Krishna consciousness, we have to present Krishna as the supreme, ultimate truth, personality of Godhead, who is to be surrendered to. Krishna demands surrender. It's an exclusivity. Mamekam sharanam vraja. Surrender to me. But the very great difference between Krishna's teaching Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna and the blind faith that is demanded in certain religions is that Krishna wants Arjuna to understand his position, his meaning Krishna and Arjuna's. And on the base, Krishna wants Arjuna to understand, and on the basis of that knowledge to surrender to Krishna. So there is a very great difference between the absolutism of Krishna consciousness and that of what we may call other religious traditions. Because certain religious traditions, although they have some vague idea of a God who should be obeyed, they don't know actually who he is or what he wants of us. Nor do they have a scientific and systematic knowledge of the position of God, the position of the jiva, the nature of this material world, why we're in this material world, how to advance in God consciousness, and therefore they necessarily demand blind faith, because they can't explain hardly anything, and therefore they just need to blindly believe in a God and who you know probably nothing about. And why should we do that? Well, or why is there suffering in the world, for instance, because someone a long time ago ate an apple? So there is a lot of difference between it's not a correct pejorative to call someone who presents Krishna consciousness in a manner given by the previous acharyas, according to Shastra, to call such a person fundamentalist, as if that is the same as a Christian fundamentalist or Islamic fundamentalist. That in itself, I would say, is a fundamentalist statement. It has a fundamental lack of understanding of the whole process of Krishna consciousness. Nonetheless, some of the things I'm going to discuss may sound very heavy. But actually, Guru Shastra, Sadhu Shastra are our guides, and they are heavy. Human life is meant for God realization. If we hear or anything Prabhupada says or read his books, he's quite different from the fluffy pie in the sky, love and peace, giggling so-called sadhus who are popular in India and in the West, who is just love and peace. But the love and peace are not defined. This impersonalist, rascals, as Prabhupada called them, who just pose as gurus without giving clear knowledge of the purpose of life and how to attain it. Srila Prabhupada was very heavy, very strong on the basis of Shastra, that meat-eating, gambling, illicit sex and intoxication are sinful. That modern society is a society of cats and dogs in human form. Srila Prabhupada used such language. Shastra uses such language. Rishabdev compares to hogs, people who live without inquiring into the goal of life and who live for sense gratification. What is that verse? Nunam from Nayam Deho Deha Bhajam Viloke Kashtan Kaman Arade Vidbhuja. Vidbhuja means stool. Yeah. We all know the verse. So, if we are to present Krishna consciousness as it is, and if we are to live Krishna consciousness as it is, then we have to follow Guru, Sadhu and Shastra, which are very heavy. Krishna consciousness is not a light undertaking. It's not just a matter of saying some slogans and smiling at people, but it requires surrender to Krishna. Okay, I'm going to finish there because the next section, the next sentence that I'm going to speak leads me into a whole new discussion. And there's only 6.5 minutes left of the scheduled time. So Hare Krishna, thank you very much for coming. And you weren't there at the beginning? No. Alright. At the beginning I said, discussion later, please, because I'm trying to do a systematic presentation here. So if you bring up a question, it's likely to bring up a question which is likely to be addressed anyway in the course of what I'm saying. So all comments, questions, protests, etc., if you feel like coming back again, you can